please state their name for the record.
Logan Alexander.
Remy Hire.
Berkeley Morris. Caroline Kim.
Ava Avra.
Candace Owens.
Russell Lee. Ian Simon.
And Abigail Nalmed as chair. Quorum has been established with 9 members present. May all members of the public please state their name for the record.
Tyler Sklar.
Jonah Ferber. Blake Cox.
Riley Swansky.
Okay, perfect. Please keep in mind that these meetings may be visually or audio recorded. Okay, we're going to start with SSB 2026 1024. There is an author present. You have 5 minutes of presentation whenever you're ready.
Perfect. This is the SGI Removal Act, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. I love SGI as an agency. I was the chief of staff of it a few years ago. Unfortunately, the past 2 years, we've really struggled to get people in attendance, so we've had to cancel the conference before it's even happening. And yeah, so for that reason, we're going to remove the conference. And just as an agency that's recurring, I think if an individual student body president wants to bring it back, they're more than welcome to do so, and they have the authority to do so without a code revision. And I think it's just a little bit of, an additional student government representative that, if the agency is not really viable anymore, I think it should be stricken from the code. So that's all this is. If you have any questions, I'm here for it.
Okay, we now move into 5 minutes of question and answer, starting now. Seeing as there's no questions, we now move into 5 minutes of debate.
I think this is pretty straightforward, because SGI has had troubles with attendance over the last several years. It makes sense why it would be removed, as a lot of time has gone into it without very much success. So I think it's pretty straightforward, and I don't see any formatting issues with the bill.
Yeah, I mean, especially if the conferences has been canceled the last 2 years. There's so many great conferences and different things that student government does here. So if something's not getting attended and having to be canceled, it makes sense that it would be stricken.
Yeah, I think definitely we can reallocate those resources better. There's no conference going on. There's no way to have it, right?
Okay, seeing as there's no more debate, we move into 2 minutes of final privilege.
I'll like to yield my final privilege. Thank you.
Perfect. We're now in line for motions. Are there any motions at this time?
I move to pass SSB 2026-1024 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1024 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1025. There is an author present. You have 5 minutes of presentation whenever you're ready.
This is the student honor. Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is what I thought. Okay, so essentially this bill merges the Student Honor Code Administration and Chomp the Vote as 2 agencies. Currently, I think they're 2 agencies that in recent years have a little bit of struggled to really kind of find their footing and be incredibly effective programmers. And I think I've had a lot of conversations, and I think it would be for the best if those 2 agencies were just merged into one. At the end of the day, it would require fewer resources, and I think that, with a little bit more to do, I think it would elevate the impact. And I think having the 2 as one is just more beneficial. I did my best to merge the 2 codes into one. I admit I have a rocky track record with Judish. I'm not great at those bills. So if there's any, formatting or small errors that you think need to be changed, I absolutely would invite those. But I think the intent of the bill is pretty straightforward. It's kind of just on my way out, if I could have reorganized it in a certain way. And I think with hindsight, I think it would be better if these 2 agencies were merged into one. And I think that they're similar enough where I think it justifies the 2 being one agency, and I think it's pretty straightforward. Yeah, I'll yield the rest of my time.
Perfect. We are now in line for 5 minutes of question and answer. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we're now in line for 5 minutes of debate. Or is there any debate?
I think this sounds like a great change of using resources a lot more effectively to make a better impact on the student body, which is the whole point of their existence.
Yeah, I think maybe in the future we could work to define 223.11 a little more, just to add like a timeline on how the agency could, provide opportunities to register, maybe like events and stuff like that. But overall, it makes sense.
Yeah, just to point out some of the like small possible amendments that Blake alluded to. You know, I just noticed that there's like two titles, one of which was properly amended to the new agency that will come into existence, and then one that like is just above it, as essentially two titles to the chapter. So I would think that we should probably just remove that first title that's still titled Trump the Vote for chapter 223.
Yeah, along those same lines, I think there's like a simple double space in 223.12, but outside of that, this bill looks super well written, and I think it just makes sense for what we currently have.
I also think we could define in 223.31 having at least one semester of residency. I think kind of just makes sense to define it a little better so that there's no confusion in the future about it.
To clarify that actually, I believe that the term is in residence just indicates that you're physically present, attending the University of Florida, not specifically like any location parameters.
Right.
Is there any further debate? Alright, seeing none, we now move into 2 minutes of final privilege.
Yeah, I guess two things I'll touch on. First, on the voter registration, and I guess just wider, historical context for both of these agencies. Both of them had changed drastically over time from what they originally were, which is I think how we got here. Student honor code originally was like the student honor court, and then we had to kind of change that because of Florida law. So they've kind of been struggling to kind of find a strong identity. And Chomp the Vote, it was recently decided that like it's a legal liability for them to actually be registering people. I believe we're legally not allowed to register someone. I think all we can do is point them in the direction of how to register. And ever since that happened, they've been kind of struggling a little bit. So a little bit of historical context as to why this change is being made. And also I know because you brought up the voter registration, like it's like you would think that Chomp the Vote, it's like, oh, they just go register people to vote, but then they actually can't. So it's, kind of just ended up, wow, we're here. But yeah, just a little bit of historical context. Thanks for your consideration. I'll yield the rest of my time.
Okay, perfect. We are now in line for motions. Are there any motions at this time?
I move to amend SSB 2026-1025 by removing one of the spaces in 223.12 between B and empower. By unanimous consent.
There's been motion to amend SSB 2026-1025 to remove one of the spaces in 223.12 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, motion passes.
I move to amend SSB 2026-1025 to remove the first title, chapter 223, Trump the Vote, that whole line by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to amend SSB 2026-1025 to get rid of the, I believe, clerical error of chapter 223 being there twice by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the motion passes. So just for also clarity, I'm just gonna delete it because it seems to be just like a repeat copy and not something that's actually in the 200 codes. And let me know when that change updates. Are there any further motions at this time?
I move to pass SSB 2026-1025 by unanimous consent.
Okay, I'm gonna object to that. Do I hear a motion to add the before student civic and honor agency, in the proper places such as 223.12 by name? Do I hear a motion? Are there any objections? Seeing none, the motion passes. Okay. Besides for 223.12, does anyone else see where that needs to be amended? SSB 2026-1025 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the motion passes. Thank you, Student Body President Cox, for coming in. Okay, we are now in line for, oh, you do have a third one. We're now in line for SSB 2026-1026. There is an author present. You have 5 minutes.
I believe these are the revisions to Roots, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. So I met in this very room actually with a lot of these student org leaders that we work with so frequently in Roots, and it was a long, essentially listening session on changes that they would like to see made, and these code changes reflect said meeting. Pretty straightforward. A lot of the changes, I think, probably the only one that might get flagged by some of you is, oh, why is this? Is we removed Senate meeting to approve the vice chairs. This was a direct request from the student org leaders themselves. They said, I feel like the vice chair approvals take a really long time and it's a whole process and it's been delayed in the past. And I said, well, that's because it has to go through Senate and they don't always meet over summer. And they specifically said, I said, can I remove that? And they said, yes. So they specifically requested it. We also added in the safeguards so that they have a little bit more authority to kind of override the vice chair selection so that they have a little bit more input. And I know anything that removes some of Senate's authorities may have kind of raised some flags, but that was a change made directly from the org leaders, their request, essentially just to expedite the process so that we don't have to have any delays in their programming happening, which I think is pretty straightforward, but I just wanted to touch on that one because I think it might be the most potentially contestable code in there. But yeah, that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're now in line for 5 minutes of question and answers. Seeing none, we're now in line for 5 minutes of debate, starting now.
This makes complete sense to me. I feel like if the agency head or chairperson requests a change like this, it feels pretty straightforward to go ahead with it. I haven't seen any kind of errors in formatting or anything like that, so it looks great to me.
Yeah, I agree. If the process to kind of pick the positions for the agency can be streamlined further, and the best, most qualified people are still being chosen, then I don't see why the change would be made.
Seeing as there's no further debate, we're now in line for 2 minutes of final privilege.
I'll yield that. Thank you.
We are now in line for motions. Are there any motions at this time?
Move to pass SSB 2026-1026 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1026 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the motion passes. Now I can thank you for coming.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good day.
You too. Alright, we are now in line for SSB 2026-1027. There is a sponsor present, Senator Kim. If you would like to speak on it, you have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
I'll make it super brief, but I know this is something that the Women's Caucus has been working toward for a very long time. It's essentially just, as it states, a resolution advocating for a menstrual product drive for the Field and Fork Pantry. And a lot of the other members on the caucus are very supportive of this, so this is something we just wanted to output as a way for us to support women from Senate.
Right, we now move into 5 minutes of question and answer. Seeing none, we now move into 5 minutes of debate.
As far as the mission, it looks great. Only thing I have is as far as formatting, I believe the last whereas clause should end with them and not and. But I haven't seen any other formatting issues. That's the only one that caught my eye.
Yeah, I would like to ask someone to make the motion to bold the title, just for like format's sake, to make sure that everything is the same. But that's all I have.
Yeah, I also noticed just there's in the third whereas clause, the N of nearly is bolded, which it probably shouldn't be, but that's a pretty easy fix.
If you refresh, I believe it is
Oh.
there.
In the fourth whereas clause, there seems to be an extra space before the semicolon after period.
And then in the sponsors, there's a double V for mindset.
think, speaking to the proviso, it looks like all these people are pretty accessible. From just some brief research online, it seems like their emails should be easy for the Senate secretaries, so if we want to amend that, we can, but just, briefly speaking to that, I think it should be straightforward.
Okay, seeing as there's no more debate, we now move into 2 minutes of final privilege. Whenever you're ready.
Let's Senator Purple was.
Okay. Yeah, we've been talking about this in the Women's Caucus for quite a while now, so I'm happy to see it coming forth. It has a few formatting issues that we can fix up real quick. I'm glad to hear everyone seems to be in support of this great cause. I yield.
You're now in line for motions. Are there any motions at this time?
I move to amend SSB 2026-1027 by changing the last whereas clause, the last word and to then. By unanimous consent, sorry.
There's been a motion to amend SSB 2026-1027 to edit the last whereas clause and change the word and to then by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes.
I move to amend SSB 2026-1027 by building the title Resolution Advocating for a Menstrual Product Drive for the Field Report Pantry by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to amend SSB 2026-1027 to hold the title by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. Are there any further motions?
I move to amend SSB 2026-1027 by removing the extra space after period in the fourth whereas clause. By unanimous consent, sorry guys.
There's been a motion to amend SSB 2026-1027 to remove the extra space after period by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the motion passes.
Move to amend SSB 2026-1027 by removing the second Senator by Sacramento since matches.
There's been a motion to amend SSB 2026-1027 to edit the sponsor line and remove the double sponsor by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the motion passes.
I move to pass SSB 2026-1027 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1027 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1028. There is a sponsor present. You have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Yeah, this is also just another bill that, or resolution that, the Women's Caucus has been working towards. It was in collaboration with one of the, cabinet agencies, so, it was just, I think, a good way to work with other people and other leadership on campus to, promote safety. And I'll yield the rest of my time.
We are now in line for 5 minutes of question and answer, starting now. I just have a question. So in the proviso, the Gender and Sexuality Agency Head Archibald Crossman, I believe the name includes protection. Is that intentional or would you like to?
We can go ahead and add that in.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, we move into 5 minutes of debate.
Another great mission by the Women's Caucus. Only thing, a couple formatting things. The first whereas clause should have a comma after the first and, so at the end of the sentence. And then editing the proviso to include protection. That's all I see.
Yeah, I think just briefly adding on to that, just hyperlinking the first source, as Senator Simon was also talking about. But this bill looks great.
Seeing as there's no further debate, we move into 2 minutes of final privilege.
I'll get vice president.
Okay, we now move in for motions. Are there any motions at this time?
I move to amend SSB 2026-1028 by adding a comma after the and, at the end of the first whereas clause by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to amend SSB 2026-1028 to add a comma in the first whereas clause by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes.
Move to amend SSB 2026-1028 by hyperlinking the first source by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to amend SSB 2026-1028 to add in the hyperlink to the first source by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes.
I move to amend SSB 2026-1028 by adding protection and the proviso after gender and sexuality by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to amend SSB 2026-1028 to add in protection to the gender and sexuality agency by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the motion passes.
I move to pass SSB 2026-1028 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1028 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1029. I am an author. Time to start now. So, okay, I'm just gonna take this time to explain what we did for all of them. And if any of the other authors would like to add something, they're more than welcome to. But the intent is to, better distinguish the 300 codes from the rules and procedures. And this is the first big wave of documents to do so, removing some of the things from the 300 codes that would better be suited in the rules and procedures, and vice versa. This is just, again, the first big wave of legislation. So, for example, this is a piece of legislation that removes some of Chapter 302, not all of it, hence why the chapter title is not X'd out. And it takes the Senate President's signature and puts it into this basically just takes it out of the 300 codes. But there is a legislation that works in conjunction with it that puts it into the rules and procedures. So yeah, it's just taking it out. Does any other author want to add anything else?
Yeah, I can just say that we kind of felt that the 300 code should be like a little broader. And within the 300 code, there's a lot of very specific stuff that should be in the rules and procedures. So we're just kind of trying to separate that a little bit and make it clear in future reference, just so that there's no like, weird cases in the future where folks are messed up there.
Yeah, there's also just a little bit overlap between the 300 code and rule of procedures, so this kind of works as well to kind of ensure that they both, neither one of it's kind of repeat. There is each rule is in multiple location.
Alrighty. We now move into 5 minutes of question and answer. Are there any questions?
Could one of the authors clarify, I know in 1030, it changes to 7. Could one of the authors just clarify why it was 10 in this original legislation and why that's being removed?
Yeah, so I'm gonna hold that question until we get to 1030 because the reason for the change, well, we're just gonna talk about it in 1030, just because 1029, all this piece of legislation is doing is removing it from the 300 codes. So, yeah, I hope that does it. Are there any further questions at this time? Okay, seeing none, we now move into 5 minutes of debate. Is there any debate?
This makes a lot of sense and will just help us to be a more efficient
Alrighty, we're now in line for motions final privilege. Does any author want to take final privilege?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, like I said, to kind of further clarify the rules. I think it just makes sense, and then we'll work on it further to try and do more, but for right now, this is kind of what we have to do.
We now are in line for motions, but before that, can any members of the public who have entered the room please state their name for the record?
Kayla Aurora.
Thank you. Okay, now we're in line for any motions. Are there any motions at this time?
Move to pass SSB 2026-1029 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1029 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. Okay. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1030. 5 minutes starting now. So again, I'm just gonna briefly talk on this one. So this one edits the past legislation, into the rules and procedures. There are 2 things really that to note in this piece of legislation. The first is the change from 10 days to 7 days. The signature of the Senate President doesn't actually do anything. The signature of the Senate President is simply to confirm that this was something that was passed by the Senate, and the Senate President doesn't actually have any veto power. Therefore, when putting it into the rules and procedures, I decided to make a new section called Senate President's Signature and put it before vetoes. Because for those of you who aren't aware of the process, when a bill or piece of legislation is passed through the Senate chamber, it then will get sent to the Senate President's desk, and currently it has 10 days to be signed into basically law or whatever, into the next step by the Senate President. If the Senate President doesn't sign it in those 10 days, it still passes on. Whether the Senate President signs it or not genuinely has no effect on the process of the legislation. So that's why we lowered it to 7 days, because it's just stalling the legislative process, allowing it to sit for that long. And then 7 days is the week, so they have a week to sign it. And then the proviso. So some of you might be thinking like, well, this is a direct contradiction to what's in the 300 codes, because currently the 300 codes say 10 days. This piece of legislation shall only take effect upon the confirmation of SSB 2026-1029. So only when 1029, which strikes this from 300 codes, is passed and genuine into effect, everything in the process done, will this piece of legislation take effect. So there's no worry about there being conflicting things in the rules and procedures in 300 codes. This will, again, only go into effect once that other section has been crossed out. I'm done. Does anybody else want to say anything?
I just think this makes it more simple.
Oh, hold on, we're still in, oh yeah, you were an author.
Yeah, so this just makes it, I think, more simple for everyone, not just senators, like anyone that wants to look at the codes and rules and procedures, and I think this is pretty straightforward, so yeah.
Okay, we're now in line for 5 minutes of question and answer. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we're now in line for 5 minutes of debate. Is there any debate?
I asked a question for the last bill. I think my question was answered. This makes complete sense to me where it was put and how it's written. So I have only but good things to say about this.
I agree, it helps with like the efficiency aspect.
Okay, we now move into 2 minutes of final privilege. Would anyone like to take final privilege? Okay, we're now in line for motions. Are there any motions at this time?
I move to pass SSB 2026-1030 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1030 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. Getting through this quickly, guys. Okay, we're now in line for SSB 2026-1031. Would an author or sponsor like to present? I will present. Okay, so 1031 I think it's this one that, the numbers got mixed up a little bit. I was trying to transfer all of the legislation from my email into the doc, and, there was a lot of them, so I didn't transfer the one that works in conjunction with this 1041, as you see in the proviso, until the last one, so, I was also too lazy to change the numbers. So it says, this piece of legislation shall take into effect upon the confirmation of SSB 2026-1041. This is moving the Senate President and Pro Tempore trophy awards into the 600 codes. For those of you who don't know, the 600 codes are the awards codes, so it makes more sense to have all of the awards there and not in the 300 codes. We're now in line for 5 minutes of question and answers right now. We are now in line for 5 minutes of debate.
Yeah, just real quick, looking at the 600 codes, I mean, I'm the author of this, but the 600 codes go up to chapter 650, and then the jump to 653 on that. So I'm not sure if that's kind of a little bit of a gap or.
Yeah, so, there are other pieces of legislation down, like I think 1035,
Oh, we're just
1036,
adding more.
1037, yeah. Those are 651 and 652.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
If those
Yeah.
weren't to pass, then the Senate secretaries would themselves change the chapter title, to whatever's next in the order. That's something that they can totally do from their side, so that's not a worry. But good catch, yes, 651 and 652 are both, later. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, we're now in line for 2 minutes of final privilege. Seeing none, we're now in line for motions. Are there any motions at this time?
I move to pass SSB 2026-1031 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1031 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. Okay. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1032. Would an author responsible?
Yeah, I kind of just like the best, and it just makes sense to strike first in the template section. There's really no reason it should be in 300 codes, it's kind of clogging up the 300 codes. Again, just for clarity, I think it makes sense to me.
So I'm actually gonna add in on that one. This one we're completely just getting rid of and we're not moving to the 300 codes. And there's like a few reasons for that. The first is that the chief of staff for the legislative branch, like talking with the Senate President and Senate President Pro Tempore, they also don't believe that this is a necessary position, especially not a position that needs to be in the 300 codes, like at the very minimum. So in the future, if a Senate President or Pro Tempore would like it back in the rules and procedures, that is something that they can do. This is currently just striking it from the 300 codes because it doesn't belong there in the first place. This is like an internal process within the executive board of the student senate. Yeah, and I welcome questions about why we're doing it. We're now in line for 5 minutes of question and answer.
So this was just after discussion with the Senate President and Pro Tempore that this change was made?
Yes. It was an agreement from them, from people in the past, that this position isn't really being used to the fullest extent, and they also don't think that it's a necessary power of the President and Pro Tempore. Like, the responsibilities that they have mostly can only get done by them. I know in the past, the chief of staff has been used to do minutes, but we're sending out a new working interest form, and it's gonna be kind of like structured differently, which includes the replacement agenda committee, according to the Senate President. And so that kind of gets rid of the need for someone to do minutes at the replacement agenda committee meetings anyways. Are there any further questions? We are now in line for 5 minutes of debate.
Hearing, no, go.
Sounds like a well thought out
I move past SSB 2026-1032 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1032 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1033. Would an author like to begin?
Yeah, so this one, we are just moving the Sinclair rule to the rules and procedures. This goes to kind of, what Chairwoman Ahmed was alluding to earlier, on just kind of certain very specific rules. This one pertaining to being removed from the Senate, kind of that are in 300 codes that would be more aptly placed in the rules and procedures. And I personally learned a lot about the Sinclair rule and its history from the knowledgeable Chairwoman in crafting this bill and the subsequent bill, which is the move to the rules and procedures. So that's what this is trying to accomplish.
Okay, we're now in line for 5 minutes of question and answer. I'd like to know, what is the Sinclair rule?
Yeah, so the Sinclair rule is a rule that when you cannot be removed from the Senate when you're appealing and you're your removal. And so there was a guy named Sinclair who was on appeal, and then his Senate seat was filled by someone else. And so it's saying that when there's an appeal going on, the replacement agenda committee can't choose a new senator to take your seat, because if that previous senator had won their appeal, then that was someone else voting in their seat for a possibility of moving into there.
Oh, very important.
That's
Thank
what
you.
Sinclair rule is.
Are there any further questions? Right, seeing none, are we now in line for 5 minutes of debate? Is there any debate? Seeing none, we're now in line for final privilege. Seeing none, we're now in line for motions. Are there any motions at this time?
I move to pass SSB 2026-1033 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1033 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1034. There is an author present. Would you like to present an idea?
This is just simply the move to the rules and procedures. So in 1033, that was just striking the Sinclair rule from the 300 codes, and this is moving into the rule and procedures. So it's the second half of that code change there.
Yeah, and I think it's also just kind of worth mentioning that it only takes effect once SSB 2026-1033 comes into play, so there's no overlap there. Makes sense.
We're now in line for question and answer. Are there any questions?
I noticed in 1033 that there is a paragraph about intent of the Sinclair rule that was removed. Could one of the authors speak to why that was removed?
Yes, I can. The intent is not necessary. The rule's the rule. We didn't remove anything that talks about what the rule is, what it does, how to implement it. We just simply don't need it. Yeah. Are there any further questions at this time? Seeing none, we're now in line for 5 minutes of debate, starting now. Seeing none, we're now in line for 2 minutes of final privilege. Seeing none, we're now in line for motions. Are there any motions at this time?
I move to pass SSB 2026-1034 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1034 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1035. Would an author or sponsor like to present?
I mean, yeah, it's kind of just the same as what we talked about earlier. Striking certain ones from 300 moving to 600 makes a lot of sense. It's literally English codes. So just kind of another case of clarity and cut it out and get on.
Senate proviso, it's stipulated that it won't take into effect until SSB 2026 1036, which is the next one, which actually moves it from the 300 codes goes into effect. So.
Yeah, and just for clarification, this is just, I believe John Michael Stratton Memorial Award is being moved into the 600 codes.
We're now in line for 5 minutes of question and answer, starting now.
I have a question. So for 652.1, the last sentence, there's insufficient funds, the spring award shall take presence. Why is that there and not in 652.5? Just because that has to deal with the expense when it comes to actually purchasing the award. For clarity, I feel like it should, but that's just my question.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, when I was doing this one, I kind of just copy and pasted it, because, I don't know. But that's a really good point, and if you would like to make that change, I don't know. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, we now move into 5 minutes of debate.
Yeah, just to kind of expand on your question, I think it kind of just makes sense to keep the code as it is. I mean, it definitely clarity-wise would make sense, but I mean, the award's been around for a while, it's been working. There's no real need to change it, I don't think, just because like, I mean, it's been working in the past, so kind of avoid that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I can see both sides. I think, I kind of see Logan's perspective as far as, for consistency reasons, it hasn't been brought up in the past, it hasn't proved to be an issue for anyone in the past, maybe for consistency, it could stay where it's at, but I don't feel extremely strongly one way or the other. So.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much honestly, but we can vote motions.
Okay, seeing none, we are now in line for final privilege. I'll take the final privilege. Yeah, I understand where you guys are coming from, where you say, just a direct copy and paste would be better. But at the same time, the intent is to make it better when moving it, so if there's something that you guys want to change, again, like, this is the time to do so, genuinely, like, we don't wanna have to make another code revision, so if in this bill and further bills, there's something that could be better, like, I, again, welcome it, so you guys are free to do any of that stuff. I yield the rest of my time to me. We're now in line for any motions. Are there any motions at this time?
I move to amend SSB 2026-1035 by moving the sentence in 652.1, if there are insufficient funds, the spring award shall take precedence, to 652.5. At the end of that, the annual expenses for engraving, presentation of this award shall be included in the student government administration budget, and then following with the sentence from above, if there are insufficient funds, the spring award shall take precedence. By unanimous consent.
Okay, there's been a motion to amend SSB 2026-1035, to change the last sentence of 652.1 and add it to the end of 652.5. By unanimous consent, are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes.
I move to pass SSB 2026-1035 by unanimous consent.
There has been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1035 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. So just make sure that that change is made before we move on.
That did update for me.
Okay. Okay, we are now in line. This is a lot of talking. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1036. Seeing as there are all of those sponsors present, we have 5 minutes to move it.
I feel like this is pretty straightforward. It's just in continuation from SSB 2026-1035. And again, 1035 would not take place unless
pass SSB 2026-1036 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1036 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1037. Would author sponsor like this?
This is pretty similar to the two previous bills. Again, this is just moving, in this case, the Paul Clark Memorial Award to the 600 codes for simplicity and clarity. And then the following bill, again, goes hand in hand with this one, so, yeah.
Perfect. We're now in line for 5 minutes of question and answer. We are now in line for 5 minutes of debate.
I think since we did make that, or there was that previous resolution to move the other award to the 600 kids, I think it's good to consolidate that and also do this one there. I think it just makes everything more parallel and organized, so I think it's a great change.
We are now in line for final privilege. We are now in line for motions.
I move to pass SSB 2026-1037 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1037 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1038. Would an author sponsor?
Yeah, this is the second half of SSB 1036-1037. So this will be moving the Paul Clark Memorial Award to the 600 codes. So this would, like Senator Kim mentioned, gonna keep in mind, just keep ensuring that all those awards are in the 600 codes. Yeah, in line with the other code changes that previously we made.
Yeah, but again, it doesn't affect it to the previous bill, doesn't affect, so. Yeah, there's no.
We are now in line for question and answers, starting now.
Just along the same lines, do we need any insufficient funds added to this, or is that something that we?
So I am not sure about that, but it's did the other piece of legislation say student government administration budget to limit the authors? Well, it's gonna make us debate. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, we move into 5 minutes of debates right now.
For the other award, it does say student government administration budget.
Okay, then, yeah, you can make the insufficient funds clause if you would like. I also noticed just an error on probably my part, 382.2 is still in there. It just should be moved to, deleted, or we can move it to a different one.
Yeah, this is.
Is there any further debate? We are now in line for 2 minutes of final privilege. Seeing none, we're now in line for motions. Are there any motions at this time?
I move to amend, SSB 2026-1038, by adding the insufficient clause at the end of 651.5 to go alongside, what we did in 1035 and 2026-1035. By adding, if there are insufficient funds, the spring award shall take precedence, at the end of 651.5. By unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to amend SSB 2026-1038 to add the insufficient funds clause to the end of 651.5, which states if there are insufficient funds, the spring award will take precedence. Is there any objections? There's been a motion to amend SSB 2026-1038 to, take the first sentence of 651.2 and add it to 651.1, is that correct?
Yeah.
By unanimous consent, are there any objections? Seeing none, the motion passes.
Can I just make a point? I just think that makes sense because, if you look at that full clause, it's just a formatting error, that full clause should just be the word shall consist, and you go on from that. I think that first line is meant to be the first one, it's just a formatting error.
You're just giving me some changes. Is there a motion to amend SSB 2026-1038 to remove 382.2?
So
Is there any objections? Seeing none, the motion passes. And then Riley, just, for clarification, whenever someone says so moved, it's whoever says so moved. So whenever you hear others, just write them as the person making the motion, not me. Alright, let me know if that updates for you next.
Yeah. Yeah. If you refresh again, it actually goes away.
Are there any further motions?
I move to pass SSB 2026-1038 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1038 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the motion passes. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1039. I will present this one starting now. So this one is something that I am helping Jerome out with, the Senate advisor. He also advises, a lot in student government, and so he's really knowledgeable about this kind of stuff. And we ran into kind of the question of, when does the supervisor of elections term actually end? And further down in the 700 codes, it states that they kind of have like a natural term. But natural term isn't actually defined anywhere, so I think it's important to make that specification. I made the specification that natural term, as it pertains to supervisor elections, means the period beginning with the confirmation of the appointment from the student body president-elect until the meeting following the spring validation of election results. If anyone has any questions specifically about that wording, I can answer it, but I think that it's pretty straightforward. We say the spring because supervisor election terms are year-long, so it would be obviously after the validation of election results, there's a student body president-elect. They would appoint or nominate or whatever they do the new supervisor of elections, and then they will have that term until the next validation of election results, if that makes sense, because supervisor elections are year-long. So that's it. We are now in line for 5 minutes of question and answer.
I just want to ask if the formatting of this is a little different, like the main versions is actually something like this.
I don't see a formatting page here. Oh.
It looks like so.
Oh well. I don't have an issue in mind, but anything that's like formatting, and not actually content, based, like on the page, can usually just be ascribed to the Senate president. Senate secretaries. Sorry. So the Senate secretaries can usually just take the words that are on the page, and apply the right format because they have like an editable doc of everything, and we don't, so that makes it a little difficult for us. But, yes, great question. Are there any other questions? We are now in line for 5 minutes of debate.
I think this is an addition to add, especially if it's coming from journalists and knowledge for themselves, I trust that it'll be helpful. I think it would make sense to me for your term at this point.
Yeah, I get everybody's changes, just quick. There you go, there.
Okay, we are now in line for 2 minutes of privilege. We're now in line for motions. Are there any motions at this time?
I move to pass SSB 2026-1039 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1039 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, the motion passes. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1040. This is pretty straightforward, just removing the II and the III. I have no clue if those are Roman numerals. Probably 7 and 8. Yeah, I'm pretty bad at Roman numerals, but that is the explanation. Okay, we're now in line for 5 minutes of question and answer. Seeing none, we're now in line for 5 minutes of debate.
Yeah, I feel like this is pretty straightforward, that makes sense. And this is something that the Senate secretaries can look over, but I just wanted to point it out, the font of the actual body looks to be incorrect. But again, it's not the actual content, so I just wanted to raise awareness of it.
Yeah, we can totally check that. Is there any further debate?
Yeah, I just want to say, it seems like it makes a lot of sense. I allows every single member of the student senate to become an author or sponsor, so all the students' representatives would still be able to make those bills, so.
So we are now in line for final privilege. I agree. We are now in line for motions. Are there any motions at this time?
I move to amend SSB 2026-1040, by just changing the font to Times New Roman by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to amend SSB 2026-1040 to change the font to Times New Roman font by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes.
I move to pass SSB 2026-1040 by unanimous consent.
There's been a motion to pass SSB 2026-1040 by unanimous consent. Are there any objections? Seeing none, that motion passes. Whew, last one of the day, guys. We are now in line for SSB 2026-1041. I will take 5 minutes. Starting now, this is the change, part of the changes that we saw in SSB 2026-1031 that you can see come from 311.5 and 311.6. The reason why only 311.5 and 6 were changed to the 600 codes and not 311.3 or 311.4, 311.3 and 4 are very redundant. It's already stated in the rules and procedures, the standing committees. It defines the standing committees, it gives the procedures of the standing committees, and then for 311.4, it already outlines order of succession. It actually has an entire section for order of succession, so I didn't feel the need to read those again.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally almost word for word, rules and procedures, the same things in that order of succession. I thought there's something to keep it.
And I feel like it's important to keep in mind as well that, this should be able to be understood by like the general public, and I feel like these kind of redundancies can add confusion, and I feel like just removing it altogether would increase clarity.
Okay, we're now in line for 5 minutes of question and answer. Are there any questions? We're now in line for 5 minutes of debate. Is there any debate? We are now in line for 2 minutes of final privilege. Is there any would like to take it? We are now in line for motions. Are there any motions at this time?
Move to pass SSB 2026-1041 by unanimous consent.
There's no motion to pass SSB 2026-1041 by unanimous consent. Are there any additions? Seeing as there is no more legislation to be heard, I adjourn this meeting at 2:04 p.m.